I used to be called a principal software engineer. I was paid $200,000 a year. I'm now managing a team of agents. My productivity is 10x. What should I be paid?
Good question. Aren't you in the recruitment business?
Yeah, that's it.
If your chatbot starts, spitting out Gordon Ramsay recipes instead of the answer to common questions on your website, then who in your organisation can fix it? So that in-depth knowledge is hard to replace. You can't take 20 years of experience, grab a dev and say, hey, now you know telco, right? And this concept of current ICs or individual contributors becoming a manager of agents, I think is a very real one. Yes, you're going to be uncomfortable, but really back yourself that you can learn that new skill, you can adopt a new way of working, you can learn a new industry.
On today's episode, I have Nathan Hill, head of telco at AWS. Prior to being at AWS, he spent 20 years inside the telco industry. And we talk about the different career paths people can take, getting various experiences across multiple industries and domains, or going really deep and narrow into one niche. We also talk about the challenges that he's seen with AI being rolled out into enterprise. What happens when it's rolled out? Who's taking care of it? Who's maintaining it ongoing? And it's a challenge that a lot of companies don't actually think of up front. It's a really interesting conversation around the changing nature of go-to-market, the changing nature of those sales roles. Are you better set being a pure salesperson learning technology, or being a technical expert and then learning how to sell? I hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to another episode of Building Tech Teams in the age of AI. And today we're here with Nathan Hill, head of telco at AWS. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks very much for having me.
Mate, for those of the audience that don't know who you are, give us a quick background on your current role and the journey to date.
So at the moment, I lead the AWS engagement across telcos in Australia. Prior to that, I spent more than 20 years in the telco industry across a series of roles, operations, starting out, engineering, pre-sales, sales, and ended up running sales and marketing for a challenger telco in market.
Nice. We'll get to breaking down your role and that skill set and background secondly, but start with day in, day out, you're going into enterprise level companies and rolling out AI on behalf of AWS, working with some partners as well along the way.
Absolutely, yeah. A big part of our role, especially with the large enterprises, is working with partners, and they can be a mix of our business consulting partners, so the Bains and McKinseys of the world setting out strategy. It can be the system integrators that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting in and around these telcos, and also the ISV partners, so the software partners that are building on AWS and really working sometimes in two or three different ways to try and bring together a solution.
Nice. Big question for a lot of enterprises at the moment. Hey, I want to do AI. We need to do AI. The board's pushing for AI. Question starts, do we have internal capability for it? Do we work with a partner, vendor? How does that come together? In your opinion, where have you seen the most success? Is it building out some internal capacity first? Is it engaging a partner and then reverse engineering that? What's the best approaches you've seen?
Yeah, I think it's always, it depends. I think the organizations that are doing well, they've got a really good sense of how they want to operate. There are organizations out there that have that capability. They've got the history of building. So that could be on cloud. It could be building out data platforms, now moving into AI. Or are they an organization that's typically bought? And this is a concept we've spoken about a lot over the last 5 years, this buy versus build concept. So I think having a good understanding as an organization, which direction do you want to go? Do you want to go down the path of having teams of software engineers and that capability and building up that bench strength internally? Or you're more focused on your core business, which it may be selling telco, it may be selling software, you may be a building company, and really then you want to either buy those types of solutions off the shelf, or do you want to start to bring expertise in-house either through a partner or any other method?
Yeah, it's the whole thing with AI at the moment. Just because you can build it doesn't mean you should, right? If it takes you away from your core capacity of what you actually do day in, day out. Where have you seen it go mostly wrong? Where have you seen the big disasters? Is it a traditional organization trying to then become a technology company? Where have you seen it go wrong?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I look at. I think if we think about innovation, and it doesn't need to be around AI, but how is an organization set up for innovation? Do they have a singular function that's looking at how we adopt this new technology, be it AI or something else, and how do we do it quickly and how do we drive business benefit? Or is it done through consultation, 4, 5, 6, 10 different teams trying to have input? So that's the first thing I'd look at to say, can they move fast enough? And a natural one in the cloud world is, could a software engineer create a new account relatively quickly? Or is there 6, 7 hoops they need to go through just to create an account, to create a sandbox? So I think establishing, who's driving innovation, who has that mandate, and ensuring they have control. And then sort of touching on my previous point, depending on the skill set. So, and also identifying what outcome they're trying to drive. So is there something off the shelf that can enable them to move quickly, has the right guardrails, is secure, is going to meet the sovereignty requirements depending on their industry? Or is the problem they're trying to solve highly customized to their industry or their organization, which is then lends itself to something you can't buy off the shelf? That's where you do need to look at bespoke and custom solutions to drive that outcome. So where I've seen companies trip up is where they get that mix wrong. They're either buying a fairly standard solution and expecting it to be highly customized to drive an outcome, or they're going the other way. They're getting a very complex model, a very complex platform, a very complex architecture to solve a basic problem, which they could just go and buy off the shelf.
For the companies that are trying to do it and doing it, you mentioned just before, actually just using a use case to start with. So when you go to an organization, obviously, you're selling a big picture, you've got plenty of products there. Is there a successful avenue where you go in, find a use case for the new product, let's say AI at the moment, get it into production, show some value, and then start to chip away at further parts of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of that muscle memory. Can we find something that helps you build something end to end? And I think another challenge that's been occurring across enterprises is finding a use case, finding a proof of concept, but building it in a way that it in no way can get to production. So sometimes there's a trap of going, hey, we've done AI, we've proven something can work. But if the path to production is not built or is a long way out, the time to realize value isn't there. So I think absolutely finding a use case that's relevant to the organization, building a team, either internal or external, to go and execute that, ensuring that it has a path to production, and then finally that it can be operationalized. So is the organization you're building it with, are they mature enough to manage this solution that's interfacing with customers or becomes a key part of your organization? Or will there be a challenge if it stops working or if there's a problem with that solution?
Nice. So there's a lot of talk around becoming AI native as a company, and the big valuations on the startups at the moment or scale-ups are AI native companies. There's the $1 trillion problem of becoming AI native service businesses, that type of thing. Is it a real thing for most companies to become AI native? Or do you think it's just, hey, we look at it like cloud or like another tool and just improve efficiencies through the business, and that's a good use case?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's going to depend. In the cloud world, we've had concepts of ISV motions. So these are cloud native businesses, Canvas, Atlassians, these people that were born in the cloud. So they only ever built on cloud.
Yeah.
But then if you look at traditional organizations, banking, telco, they've got a long list of technical debt and legacy systems that have been in place for 10, 20, sometimes 30 years. So they need to think about a different way of adopting this type of technology. So I think, the aspiration can't be start with we want to be cloud native. It needs to think about how can this technology be relevant into our organization? Does it differentiate us from our competitors? Does it make us more efficient? Does it allow us to reach a broader market to drive top line revenue? And it's those sorts of tangible outcomes that then drive the tech strategy rather than the other way around.
Yeah, nice. Mate, earlier on you mentioned security, you mentioned scalability, guardrails. I think the big challenge at the moment for a lot of organizations, especially at enterprise level, again, all the hype's around startups. I can build this, so I can scale it quick. I can get a website live in a day. There's a recruitment company I've seen it online that have talked about building their own ATS system. Building your own ATS system then has ramifications once you start to put candidate and client data in there. You start to put ID in there, and then you actually become a software business, and you have legal ramifications around actually securing that, making it stable, secure. For enterprise, I think it's a bigger challenge, or it's that same challenge again, right? You have to actually, you've got that fight between doing it quickly, showing some form of value, because again, boards are looking for, shareholders are looking for, what are we doing, how are we progressing, versus the technology team, which can sometimes be seen as pulling the company back or putting these guardrail security in place. How have you seen that play out? Have you seen companies do that well? It's a very real challenge.
Yeah, I think if we look at taking an ultra conservative approach, so some organizations are, we're not going to adopt AI until we're 100% certain that we're fully compliant, secure, governed. But then there's an opportunity cost of doing that way. So the customers, especially in finance and telco, where they're heavily regulated, the way to adopt this is, what can we do now safely? Right? So that might mean not trying to automate one process end to end. It could be we're comfortable and we've got confidence that half of the process can be supported by AI. The second half, we're going to use our traditional methods, but that doesn't mean that you're not getting value. You may still realize 50% of the benefit, whether that's in effort, whether that's in time to release, whether that, again, touching or getting access to a greater client base. So breaking that up into what's achievable now, and then building a path to that fully governed, fully secure, fully sovereign style of environment. So getting that balance right.
You mentioned before, obviously you work with a lot of partners, and you yourself as an external vendor, you're working with these companies. The big challenge is, as you're completing the project and starting to finish that, do the companies you're working with have internal capability, capacity to actually maintain the products ongoing? And the big challenge is that handover moment. Where are you seeing things go well? How are companies best managing it? Is it hiring that team in conjunction with the project actually going on? Obviously, there's big costs involved in either building internal capacity. We've touched on it before. Are they going to maintain it? What does that look like?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I think when there's strategies built outside an organization, often the people writing those strategies aren't involved in the delivery. So I think that's a common challenge. So getting that connection between strategy and the delivery teams through a partner, obviously embedded within that organization. I think the second part is, again, looking forward towards that end state. So as these solutions are being built, what does my operating model look like when in production? Now, for some organizations, that is, we've now got access to amazing tooling. We've got the ability to use tools for natural language programming and software development. So we want to embrace that and bring the capability in-house, right? So we might have domain experts. Let's say I've been a network engineer for 20 years. It's now very possible to upskill them to have a software aspect to their role, as opposed to 5 years ago, that was very, very difficult, or there was a very small subset of those resources that could make that bridge. Or do you say, no, we're going to focus on our knitting, we're going to focus on our core business, which is doing X, Y, Z, and we're going to bring a partner in to manage the operational elements, right? So I think, again, getting a clear vision on what that end state is. But what's worked well is, if a customer's looking to leverage a partner through a program to deliver X, Y, Z outcome, and they want the capability in-house, is really ensuring that those teams are side by side. So the partner is teamed up with the internal teams, that the internal teams have enough time to able to absorb this new information. Often what we've seen is enterprises are pulling people out of their day jobs to do this certain project, but their time is limited. They can't absorb the new capability. And really ensuring that, the question is, if we've put an agent into production, if it's engaging with our customers, if it becomes a core requirement for us doing our finance or our end of month reporting, if your chatbot starts spitting out Gordon Ramsay recipes instead of the answer to common questions on your website, then who in your organization can fix it? Do you pull it out of production? Can you adjust it on the fly? So I think, there's various models that can work, but asking those questions up front, asking the questions of your partners, really having a think about what your operating model looks like post-project is really key in getting it right.
Nice. The way the teams are set up, is it any different at the moment with rolling out AI as opposed to when you were rolling out cloud many moons ago?
Yeah, a lot of conversations with CIOs, CTOs around, the concept of a cloud center of excellence has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
We've now evolved that into data centers of excellence as we went into data warehousing and lighthouses and other concepts. Now it's AI centers of excellence. And how does that work across an organization? There's two parts. There's one, okay, what's your resourcing model? What's your organization structure look like? But then it's how is your organization adopting AI? And I was lucky enough to spend some time with a guy by the name of Tom Soderstrom. He spent some time as the CTO of NASA, right? And he had a really cool analogy when rolling out new tech and at NASA, it was about adopting cloud for the first time. And when you talk to customers, they're concerned about risk. He would just say, well, it's pretty risky putting a space shuttle up in the sky. So we thought about risk, right? But he spoke a lot around the people aspect, which is if you centralize innovation, at least initially, and a lot of organizations are doing it, you stand up an AI team, right? So you can really focus that capability and upskill them, making sure they understand the tech, the security, the governance. But the way to get real business value is you need the lines of business leaning in. They've got the insights in what can drive value, right? They may not understand at a technical level the AI component, but they're the ones that know where it can have the biggest impact. So how do you create that bridge? And his concept was around, you don't want this cool kids aspect where there's this centralized team of cool kids that get up in front of the town hall and get to talk about AI and have all these cool aspects, but they're isolated from the business. So I think what we're seeing is organizations start with a central model, but they've got a very clear plan to then think about either how do we seed this capability into the various business units or lines of business within an organization, but the end state is that it should live there.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the only way to tangibly continue to drive value, ensure that, if it's James that has a great insight into how to improve XYZ process or how to make a customer experience more effective or to how to drive greater sales, that they're close to the technology that can enable it.
Yeah, nice. And it probably comes back to your point made before where consultancies potentially own the strategy. And if that strategy is not owned internally, not driven internally, the opportunities for that to fall away or get buy-in throughout the organisation falls apart.
100%, or you're leading into another engagement
Yeah.
and another engagement and another engagement, which, is not sustainable in the long term.
No, I like it. Mate, you mentioned before the network engineer who's now potentially more capable, potentially network engineer is a pseudo software engineer to an extent. From the internal teams, how have you seen that adjustment work best than the companies you've worked with? Is it we're working with hiring those specialists in, or is it just taking those people that have that internal knowledge of how the business works? Now you upskill them with the right skills. You potentially help them on that engagement, on that learning path. How have you seen that involved?
Yeah, 100%. I think if you looked at telco networks 10 years ago, you might say 10% of those resources knew anything about software. What we'll see in the next 5 years is that 90% of those resources will know a lot about software. These networks will become more software defined. I'll be leveraging AI to drive better outcomes. So what I've seen is that you can't beat domain expertise. Especially in networking. We're talking about real things. We're talking about copper in the ground, fiber. We're talking about satellites. We're talking about subsea cable. We're talking about physical exchanges. So that in-depth knowledge is hard to replace. You can't take 20 years of experience, grab a dev and say, hey, now you know telco, right? But you can, with the tools available now, and you've shared this online on how you can vibe code and build agents, that we can bring that knowledge to those domain experts. And I think that's the path that organizations want to take. Now, not everyone's going to be on that. Not everyone's going to want to do that. But I think as that evolves over time, that's how telcos or any organization is going to have the biggest impact.
I like this angle, and there's multiple parts I could pull apart. Let's go start with, you're a network engineer, strong domain knowledge, new tooling now, helps you understand software, even be able to write something. As opposed to the role of a software engineer who maybe doesn't have that deep knowledge, but understands how to actually build software, what's under the hood, how to architect it right, who's in the better position going forward. Do you have an opinion on that?
Not really. I think we're still working it out.
Yep.
I'd say, and the industry's working it out. There's various models where you have the domain experts now with software capability, but to ensure consistency, compliance, then you have a deep software development expertise sitting above, so that we're checking the coding, we're ensuring it's aligned, we're ensuring that it meets all our criteria. That's one model I've seen. But I think it's going to evolve.
Yep.
We don't know. With new models, new tooling available. Who would have thought we're going to be here 2 years ago, let alone where we're going to be in another 2 years.
You've mentioned before online about agents not replacing engineers. You can have a look at, hey, we've got more capability now internally because our team's got better tooling. Do we just do more with that team now as opposed to replacing them?
Yeah.
You want to flush that one out at all?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, especially when it comes to things like telco, which is critical infrastructure, you think about the telecom days when we had copper in the ground as a government-owned organisation because it was essential. People needed to use the telephone. Now we have critical infrastructure, but it's run by privately owned companies, right? So I think given the compliance and regulatory aspects, and we've seen the impacts that can happen when there's challenges in these telco networks, that the human in the loop process will still be there. But in the networking space, there's examples globally where it is about aggregating insights. These telco networks are extremely complex. There's multiple vendors, there's environmental challenges. So being able to aggregate that information, so whether that's aggregating alarms and proactively providing a resolution that an engineer then takes context into and takes action, that's one we've seen. Or it's around, generating those insights at scale. So when you think about all the information that can be captured across mobile and fixed networks, what insights can we get from that?
And that's where this tooling's just given capability that we've never had before, right?
Absolutely. And you think about forecasting, we look ahead to Brisbane Olympics, you can build out this digital twin of an entire telco network and start to run simulations on the amount of tourists in a given suburb and think what that impact that would have on capacity. So definitely human in the loop. Obviously this will evolve. And, this concept of current ICs or individual contributors becoming a manager of agents, I think is a very real one.
Agreed. If we're talking about that role in particular, again, controversial online. If I'm one of these people that manages a team of agents now, I used to be called a principal software engineer. I was paid $200,000 a year. I'm now managing a team of agents. My productivity is 10x. What should I be paid?
Good question. Aren't you in the recruitment business?
Yeah, that's it.
It's difficult. I think, again, everyone's working this out. And I think a big challenge at the moment is, although intuitively we know that, whether you're using Claude or whether you're using ChatGPT to write recipes or plan your holiday and in a business context, clean up your emails, write strategy documents, is quantifying the exact value of that right now. Is it minutes in a day? Is it hours in a day? Is there more accuracy? Is this driving certain benefits organization-wide? So I think as we can quantify the benefit, then that'll have a natural flow onto, things like remuneration and scale.
And I think we're starting to see with some people offering, $1 million plus salaries, and they're doing that on the basis of not necessarily they're going to provide $1 million today, but as they evolve, as the agents get better, as they orchestrate, architect this solution, that they're going to easily provide that as a positive ROI, right?
Yeah.
Nice. Mate, your background obviously very strong in that telco. You mentioned before domain knowledge. You've stayed in a vertical, which is not common these days. I would say, I think, people will jump around industry to industry, and you can be agnostic across industries. Do you think, obviously, it's allowed you to excel and go deep to domain knowledge? If you were giving advice to a younger version of yourself, same again, would you just stay deep and get that domain knowledge? Obviously, you've learned different things across the way. Thoughts, advice for a younger version of yourself?
Yeah, I think it's probably two ways to answer it. One is from the individual, and one is when you think about the organizations you're working with. So if I look at how I've engaged in industry, say in a sales role, the horizontal versus vertical conversation is based on the maturity of that customer. So if you're walking in, it's the first engagement, let's say 10 years ago, they've never adopted cloud, you're not going to go in with a heavy industry discussion, right? They're not ready to execute on anything industry or really deep in that domain. It's more horizontal, right? The other side, when they're really mature, then you go deep on industry, because that's where you can drive value, you can earn trust and whatever else. And then when I think from a career perspective, it's similar. If you're at the early stages of your career, I think horizontal is perfect. Get exposed to as many different industries. Two, it broadens your knowledge. Firstly, it broadens your knowledge, but secondly, I didn't know where I wanted to be. I didn't know if I wanted to be in telco. I didn't know where I wanted to be at the early starts of my career. So the more exposure you can get to different organizations, different industries, different verticals, yes, it broadens your knowledge that will help your career long term. But I think it's an awesome opportunity to find out what you're really interested in. And then you can choose to really, focus in on a particular industry.
I like that. You mentioned sales. Obviously, you're really strong in that go-to-market. Go-to-market, I think, is an increasingly important role. And I'll go back to more startups, scale-ups, right? If everyone's more technical these days, building products easier, the sales aspect of it actually becomes the bigger challenge for an organization. How have you seen the role of go-to-market change? Because I think back in the day, if I go more startup, scale-up, I can whip up a POC pretty quickly and put that in front of a client, as opposed to talking about a PowerPoint presentation or something conceptually. How's the role of go-to-market and sales changed from what you've seen over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I think, so much, 5-10 years ago was just relationship selling, and that's still important, regardless of the tech. Relationships, especially at the large end of town, are key. You need to earn that trust. But I think, customers expect more in those first types of engagements. And the analogy I always talk to with my teams is, when you go to buy a car, you can go and talk to a sales guy in a showroom, and you can say, what you're looking for in a car, the size of your family, what you want to spend, do you like red, do you like it fast, do you like slow? And the sales guy can tell you why that car would be good for you and why it's better than other brands and how many kilowatts it's got and how much torque it's got. He doesn't grab a mechanic to walk you through that, right? So I think that sort of mirrors what's expected in our industry now. As a salesperson, you're not just the relationship person. You're not just picking up the tab for lunch. You need to understand the technology that you're selling. You need to understand your customer. You need to understand your industry and where that tech is having an impact. And I think that's just going to continue. And especially over the last 2 years, when I look at salespeople in the tech world, when, it was a given that you needed to understand cloud fundamentals and things like operating model, security. But now the requirement to deeply understand AI, deeply understand guardrails, deeply understand the competitor landscape, and probably more so that bigger aspect on people and how they're going to adopt this technology is where it's really changed.
I like this because back in the days, obviously, definitely more relationship driven. You would open the door and then maybe take your solution architect, your enterprise architect along with you to actually have that technical conversation. Where the expectation these days is you actually have at least a depth of knowledge on that. You're still going to have somebody that's more technical.
100%.
Is it easier for somebody who's a charismatic, typical salesperson to learn the technical side of things, or an engineer to increase their sales knowledge?
I'm heavily biased because I came from engineering background. So, and look, I'll openly say that I've hired many a salesperson that's come from the solution architect world.
Yeah.
Having a background either in operations is that you see the tangible impacts of if a solution works or it doesn't. And that's important. And it makes you very pragmatic, and you think about how these impacts when you go to actually sell. Obviously, if you're a solution architect and you've got an interest in moving into sales, it's a massive benefit. You earn so much trust with a customer when you can understand the technology and understand the business. Not saying it can't be done, but I've seen that sort of career progression as a consistent sort of launch pad into sales.
Yeah, nice. And I think the expectation goes further than at go-to-market anyway. If you have a look at software engineers of today, the expectation back in the days, you're sitting in a dark room, you're banging out code. The expectation these days of software engineers actually understand the stakeholders, understand the customers, who are you building the technology for, why are you building said technology. So I think it's starting even as technical as a pure software engineer right through to...
Absolutely. And you've seen just how software engineers need to engage across business now. Where they are sitting within business units. They're sitting within the contact centers or the customer experience teams. They're sitting amongst the sales teams. They're sitting amongst the operations teams. They're not siloed away centrally and only get engaged when a project gets raised. So that's a huge evolution over time.
So if there's more and more overlap of the roles, how are team structures changing going forward? Is that go-to-market role a specific part? Is there more sort of overlap between the roles going forward? How do you see that sort of evolving?
Yeah, I think, look, the sales and solution architect roles haven't changed too much. I think the expectations on technical capabilities obviously changed. I think what I've seen is there's probably more a shift from, the pure pre-sales engineer, handing over to a production engineer or to someone that's going to build a proof of concept or build a solution. I'm seeing that blend more where, customers want to see the tech. They want a proof of concept that's relevant to their business. So we're seeing more and more that pre-sales function is getting hands-on and sort of helping bring to life the value that some of these solutions can build.
So if you're architecting a go-to-market function for a new company in 12 months' time, how do you go about building that go-to-market? So if I'm an enterprise company and I want to start to build a go-to-market function, how do I go about, who's my first hire, who's my second hire, what skill sets am I looking for, how does that evolve? Yeah,
I think a big part, if we're still focused around the data and AI piece, is what's your channel? We've got model providers that have direct channels to consumers, right? And that's generating a lot of revenue, a lot of interest. Sometimes that interest bleeds over to enterprise. If we go back to the iPhone wasn't an enterprise device. But what brought it into enterprise was CEOs saying, hey, my kids are talking about this cool thing called the iPhone. It was really good. I now want to use it at work, right? So we're seeing a bit of that. So I think as a go-to-market business, you've got to think, what's my channel? Am I direct? Am I targeting an organizations that are buying off the shelf? Am I targeting organizations that want to build? Or am I supporting another go-to-market via a partner and I'm essentially providing the motor, they're providing the chassis? So I think getting real clarity on that. So am I hiring a go-to-market sales leader to build a strategy in order to engage directly? And am I hiring a channel or a partner leader to go and build up the channel capability? So I think that's where I've seen organizations challenge, not having clarity. And it could be, where are we are today? Where do we want to go? Or what's our what's our roadmap look like from a capability perspective? Then when it comes down to people, it comes down to, obviously being able to engage with customers, but then build your awareness. And you can't do that without people on the ground. Yes, we can do marketing. Yes, you can use LinkedIn. Yes, you can do this type of thing. But being able to engage directly with organizations, share your message, and then amplify it is going to be the first key piece.
So if we go buy versus build, same with technology with your actual team. In that instance, it sounds like you'd find somebody with that industry or vertical knowledge, pick them up from somewhere else, build a capacity around them, and then build internally?
100%. And I think, if you are going down an industry approach, then importing industry knowledge, industry relationships is critically important just to get you in the room so that you can put forward your proposition. If it's a more horizontal play, then that's not as critical. Then it is around scaling.
Made mention that you've got an obvious bias to go to market or sales people coming from that technical background. In a world where we're going more and more online, more and more technical, we've got AI writing spam, getting hit up. Your inbox, I'm sure, is shredded. My inbox, LinkedIn, hammered every day with messages probably not written by a human. I think there's that importance of still being able to shake a hand, build a relationship with somebody. You mentioned definitely at the senior end of town. Where do you think that core sales skill function still plays out in the market?
Yeah, it's still, and I'm working with some of, Australia's largest organisations, some of the that are adopting AI at significant scale, but there's still a huge relationship aspect, and there's still a huge trust aspect. Tech doesn't sell itself. The capability can be there, but I think the role of go-to-market is to bring that to life, make it relevant to that organization, ensuring that you're presenting the technology through that customer's lens. What value is it going to drive? But also having honest conversations on their ability to execute and consume that type of technology, where I've seen some challenges in the past where you could have the world's best solution for that customer, but if internally or organizationally or at an executive level they're not aligned to take advantage of it, then it's never going to be successful. But relationship is one of the durable pieces within our organization, within the industry. Is still so important.
You mentioned there also the trust piece on, like, you might have the best piece of kit for them, might be the best piece of kit, just full stop. But if they're not able to actually execute on that and you hand it over and it's done and they're not set up well or it wasn't designed for them, then that trust is broken straight away, right?
That's right. And I think there's a lot of new entrants to market.
Yeah.
And a lot of the new entrants are using a lot of the same technology under the hood as some of the more established players. But having a track record of delivery or a track record of resiliency or a track record of security still means a lot.
I completely agree, and that's why I disagree with the SaaS apocalypse. Like, people are still going to use Salesforce because when you buy Salesforce, you have an expectation of the 99.99% uptime. They're going to be safe, secure, etc. They're going to continue to evolve their product. Enterprise isn't moving away from that to vibe code their own, solutions.
And I think, it's always an asterisk. The concept of headless SaaS. I think it's real. And through my experience in using agents and leveraging MCP, there's many platforms that I don't directly log into anymore. But there's organizations out there that have made their business on having awesome UX, having an awesome that someone with no technical background can go and make changes to, whether it's a HR system or whether it's a contact center or whether it's a CRM. So I think that is real, but it's going to be dependent on the organization. So, if you're, running, 20 dry cleaners around Australia, are you just going to log into a nice shiny UX? Probably. You don't have a team of devs. You probably don't even have an IT manager, right?
Yeah.
So you're still going to consume things in a traditional way. At the top end of town, if you're one of the large financial organizations and you've got hundreds, if not thousands of developers, could they then create their own CRM, manage it and do it securely? Probably.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a bit of a mix.
Yeah, nice. Back to the go-to-market function, one last question there. Obviously, if somebody is traditional, let's call them salesperson, not overly technical, but they want to evolve to the new go-to-market function, easiest, best way, how would they go about it, upskill themselves?
We've got all the information. We're so lucky.
Yeah.
We've got all of the internet's information literally in our pocket through our phones. There's so much free knowledge available. So about being disciplined in upskilling in those different areas. And I think we're just lucky as a tech industry in Australia that there's so much, whether it's community enablement to get access to certain training, whether it's industry enablement, there's so many opportunities to come together with industry or like-minded people to upskill. But it's just having that, motivation to learn and to be curious and to continue to look at this technology. And I think we all need to be disciplined about it because it's moving so quickly.
On that point, you've become head of telco at AWS, one of the biggest global organizations. Your journey along the way, what have you done to continue to jump those steps along the way? Is it, how long do I stay at the one organization before jumping? How long do I jump multiple times? Is it, hey, if one organization continues to provide me opportunity for growth, do I continue to stay there, or do I need to be seen to be jumping to not be a plotter? Based on your career, how, and somebody wants to grow a go-to-market, that's what they want to do for their life, that's what their vision is. Give some last point, some advice for people to grow that function, to grow their career in and around GDM.
Yeah, I think it's just back yourself. I think I was lucky. I've had a long tenure at a few organizations, but along that time I was changing roles sort of every 2 years, sometimes less. And probably through naivety, I thought, yes, I can do that next role. Yes, I put my hand up. And I really just backed my ability to learn. And that's what I'd encourage everyone to do. Yes, you're going to be uncomfortable, but really back yourself that you can learn that new skill, you can adopt a new way of working, you can learn a new industry. And, look for opportunities to expand your knowledge. And I think, whether that's at one organization that can continue to provide you that differentiated experience, or whether it's changing organizations. And yeah, I've just been extremely lucky to probably mostly by luck to get those opportunities over the last 25 years.
Yeah, you put yourself in the right place. Luck tends to have a way to find you there, right? Mate, appreciate your time today. Appreciate your time in looking at how enterprise can actually implement AI. What to avoid, best ways about going about it, and also just that changing nature of that go-to-market function. So appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
The thing I'm taking from today's conversation that I really agree with Nathan is the domain experts that learn how to build, that learn the technology, are going to be the most valuable people going forward. If you understand how a business works, how an industry works, and then now you can overlay these new skills on building automations, on looking how different technologies can be applied to existing problems, you become really valuable. I think that's the thing I'll be taking from today. Use your domain expertise, overlay some technical skills, and you can become one of the most valuable people within your organization. This was the Building Tech Teams podcast. We release new episodes every Tuesday. Really keen for feedback on guests you'd like to see, more topics you'd like to see in depth. If you'd love to provide any form of feedback to me, find me on LinkedIn, James MacDonald AU. You won't miss me. This episode was produced by Day One.